So I'm in my 20s and I'm living in New York. My roommate and I had this apartment in Astoria, Queens. And it would take us, I think, probably an hour commute time on the train to get to school. So on September 11th, we're on the train. We get to our stop. We get off the stop. We're going up the steps of the subway. And I check my watch. And I was like, oh my gosh, we actually have time to go get a coffee before we go to class. And we were both really excited because usually we were running late and we would have to go to school. When we would get to school, we'd have to run right in because we were always running late. So we were really excited. We run to the deli, we get our coffee, and then we go to class. Well, when we get to class, the teacher is like, the World Trade Center has been hit, and this is an act of terrorism. She knew. She knew before anybody said anything on the news about what was going on, because when it first was happening, people weren't sure if it was like an accident or if it was a deliberate act, but our teacher knew. She knew. So she said that the trade tower has been hit and class is canceled. She said, I have the TV on with the news. You can stay and watch the TV or you just go and do what you need to do. So we were just like, what? What do you do in that situation, right? So our school was close enough that we were able to go up to the top floor of the building and look out the window, and we could see that there was like this smoke just pouring out of the building. So my roommate and I and a friend, we were trying to figure out what the heck to do. So our friends had an aunt who lived a couple of blocks away from school, and she said, well, let's just go there. So we said, okay, so we just kind of grabbed our stuff, decided to go to her aunt's house. And when we got outside, it was just panic. Like nobody knew what to do. Everybody was on their cell phones, everyone. And no one's calls were getting through. We were trying to call people. We were trying to call our families and tell them that we were okay. Nobody could get through to anybody. And I saw this girl that was in my class, and she was on the phone, and she was trying to reach her, I think it was her boyfriend, who was working in the trade towers. And she was just crying. She was like, I can't get a hold of him. I don't know what's happening. Like, nobody knew what was going on. It was crazy. So we started to walk to the apartment, and we were looking around us, and not only was everyone on their cell phones, but because nobody was able to actually reach anybody, there were lines wrapped around the block for people waiting to use the payphones, because they thought maybe they could get through to the people they needed to talk to on their payphones. So we ended up going to my friend's apartment, and we just sat glued to the TV for hours because we didn't know what else to do. We just watched the news to see what was going on, and we were still trying to call our loved ones and say, hey, I'm okay. So I was trying to call my mom at the time, but she was working and I wasn't able to get through. And I finally was able to get through my boyfriend at the time, and he ended up calling her to say, hey, Morgan's okay. And then I ended up calling my brother, and I was completely panicked, crying, and what am I going to do? They've shut down the city. You literally could not get into or out of the city in any way. They cut off all the bridges. They stopped all the subway services. They weren't allowing any cars in and out. You couldn't take any trains anywhere. There was like no way to get out of the city. We were like trapped. So I called my brother. I finally got through, and I was panicked. I was crying. I was like, I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. Like, what if something else is going to happen? And he was like, you need to calm the F down. That was his answer to me. You need to calm the F down. And I was like, okay. I was like, okay, yeah, thanks. That's, thanks a lot. So after being in the apartment for a couple of hours, they finally started opening up trains. So I got in touch with my mom again, and I said, I want to come home. And she said, okay. So we had to walk to the train station. They still had all the subway services shut off, so we had to take Grand Central. So when we went to go walk to the train station, which was like probably 30 blocks away from where we were, it was so weird. It was so weird because all of the businesses had shut their steel gates, so you couldn't go into any of the businesses. They were all closed. There was no noise from the subway trains, and there were no cars anywhere. There were no cars on the road. So we were walking around like zombies. I mean, everywhere you looked, it was just people aimlessly walking. There was no noise from the subway. There were no cars. So it was just like eerily quiet. I felt like I was in a Stephen King novel. It was bizarre. I thought it was the end of the world. It was so scary. And, of course, we still didn't have that much information. I think at this point we knew that it had been an act of terror, but, then you don't know what's going to happen from there. So it was just crazy. We ended up walking to the train station, and I went home for the weekend, but after that, it was like, we're all in this world together, like we all live our separate lives and we all do our own thing. But after 9/11, I saw a shift in how people were acting toward one another, especially on the subway. It was just like, I think that it reminded people that even though we're all wandering around and we all have our own priorities and we're all living our own lives, I think it reminded people that even though we are all separate, we're still all in this together, So that aspect of it was really cool to see that people could stop thinking about themselves for a minute and start thinking about the greater picture, I guess. But it was so scary. It was so scary. I mean, they call them acts of terrorism because that's what ends up happening. You become terrified, especially because you have no clue what's going on. I mean, I will never forget that day, but I'm really fortunate because I was barely affected by it all other than being fearful. But there are so many people out there who suffered losses, and there's so many people who are down in the trenches just saving lives and trying to figure out the huge mess. It was crazy. It's like people say, where were you when Kennedy was shot? Where were you when 9/11 happened? Yeah. I think it's a day that many people won't forget.